Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Training Talk right here on Personal Defense Network. I'm Grant Cunningham, and this is the show where we talk about you, about your life, and how to protect it. In the next hour, we're going to look at how you can prepare and equip yourself to face that worst case scenario and keep you and your family safe from harm. Now, we don't do politics or religion on the show, and you're not going to hear crazy commentaries or fringe political commentary, just reasonable, responsible, actionable information that you can put to use right now. And I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you appreciate this approach to personal defense and personal safety and home and family defense. I hope you appreciate our approach to it, talking about reasonable and responsible and realistic things. And if you do enjoy it, hey, would you do me a favor? Would you share this show with your friends and your family, all the people on your social media right now? Hit your social media share button and share this with your friends on Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of thing, and let them know that, hey, there is a show for the rest of us who want to keep ourselves safe. And that's what we do here. And I appreciate you being here tonight. Well, Happy New Year, first of all, to everybody. It seems like it's been a long time since we did a show, but it's only been just a couple of weeks. But we're now in the new year, 2017, which we're getting started on these here pretty soon, the second year of Training Talk. And I really do appreciate you being here. If you're new, welcome to the show. I hope you enjoyed. If you're coming back, thank you for coming back and taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and learn about personal defense and safety and how you can lead a safer life. Now, you may have noticed it's the weather here in Oregon right now. We've got a really bad winter, and it's been cold. It's been snowy. We've had snow on the ground since just before Christmas, and I've got this cold. It's just awful. I'm having a difficult time talking. I'm, of course, the sore throat and the coughing and all that sort of thing that goes with it. And but not to fear. I've got a mug of tea here. This is a tea called Throat Comfort, and it's available. It's available in stores, but the big grocery stores like the Safeway store chain here locally carries it. And this stuff is absolutely great. A sip of it calms down the sore throat, calms down the coughing. I take a couple of tea bags of this stuff with me whenever I go to teach, because especially after the first day of teaching, my voice gets a little harsh, a little hoarse, and when I get back to the hotel at the end of a long training day, I make a cup of this stuff, and it just soothes the throat right down. So I'm going to be drinking this throughout the night tonight. In fact, I'm going to take a sip now. Oh yeah, that's better. Clears everything up, makes it a lot easier to talk, and reduces the pain. So, like I said, welcome to the show. I'm going to start today. By the way, before we get started, of course, I've got a special guest tonight, Aaron Israel from Fundamental Defenses here. We're going to be talking to him a little later about a couple of articles that he's written here on Personal Defense Network, and they're kind of interesting. I think you'll find it a great discussion. But of course, first, we have to get something out of the way, and you know it, you love it. That's right, it's Grant's Rant. And this, I tell you, this time, folks, I got a doozy for you. You may have heard that, you may have seen this on social media, you may have heard people talking about this, but it's, excuse me, there goes that cough, here comes the tea. There we go. You may have heard that there was a waitress in a Georgia Waffle House, and apparently I've never been to a Waffle House, but I understand it's like religion down south. But a waitress at a Georgia Waffle House apparently was working one day. Two fellows came in and robbed the place, and they got what they wanted. They turned around, ran out the front door, and were getting into their car. And the waitress runs to her car, grabs her pistol, and fires warning shots into the air to, quote, scare them off. In fact, the waitress says, "I fired safely into the air." And of course, she was fired from her job at Waffle House because of her actions. I don't know if she was charged criminally for the for what she did, but as it will become clear going as we go along here, I would be in favor of her being charged because what she did was just really, really silly. Actually, it was just really stupid. So let's take a look at this and let's see what she did wrong. First of all, of course, chasing after the bad guys after they had left the establishment. Now, keep in mind the robbery's over. They're heading to their vehicle to get the heck out of there before the police arrive. There's no reason to chase them out into the parking lot, especially if you're heading out into the parking lot to get into your own car, of course, to get a gun. And I think this sort of reinforces the point that if you've got a gun in your car, when something happens that you actually need it, it's a long ways away. You have to go out to your car to get it. So that was her first mistake, chasing these guys out when she really didn't need to. She then retrieved her gun, excuse me, and fired some shots in the air to scare them away. She felt that it was her duty to scare them away to protect her coworkers at the Waffle House. Now, remember, they're already leaving. They don't need to be scared away because they're leaving. But what's really surprising is she said she fired her rounds, her warning shots, safely into the air. If you've ever taken a class with me or you've taken a class with just about anybody, you know that one of the places that is not a generally safe direction is into the air, because what goes up has to come down. And in fact, if you read anything about celebratory gunfire, especially around the New Year's, there's always somebody that gets injured or sometimes even killed by bullets coming back down to earth from guns that have been fired up into the air. It is not a safe thing to do. You cannot, in fact, fire safely into the air. You simply can't. And that she would actually think that it was safe to fire in the air tells me that maybe her firearms education needs to be remediated just a bit. So a sad thing, this is again something that we talk about here on Training Talk from time to time, is the idea, first of all, that do you really need to? Just because you can doesn't mean it's a good idea. And in this particular case, it really wasn't a good idea. Once the incident is over, it's over. Call the police, give good descriptions, all that kind of thing. Give them a description of the car as they tore out of the parking lot, whatever it may be. But you really don't need to chase bad guys out of the building. Once they're done, once the incident is done, your role is now to call the police and get the police after them, not to chase after the bad guys and get some sort of justice for yourself. Absolute silliness. Don't do these things. And again, if you're going to carry a firearm, carry it on your person. Don't keep it in your car. Cars are theft targets, and people break into cars all the time. Lots of guns get stolen out of cars. That is not a good place to keep it, unless you have a vehicle safe that is firmly mounted to the frame of the vehicle in some way. It's just not safe to keep a gun in your car. Not in the glove compartment, not in the console, not under the seat. These are not places to keep a gun. So she did a lot of things wrong, a lot of really silly things, and she should be very, very thankful that she's not being prosecuted. She did get fired, and quite frankly, I really can't blame her employer. I wouldn't want people who obviously don't know how to safely use firearms around me and my customers if I were them either. Now, there's an addendum to this, and I heard from a fellow today who is local to this woman and indicates that one of the local gun clubs or gun ranges offered, and apparently she's taken them up on it, the chance to take a defensive firearms course and learn about what she did wrong and what she can do right in the future. And I think that's great, because that shows that not only will she get an education, she'll learn something from this, but my bet is she'll become an advocate now for safe and responsible gun handling and safe and responsible defensive shooting. So good for the folks down there in her neighborhood. Good for her for taking them up on the offer. And hopefully it works out well for her in the end. So that's the rant for this week. Excuse me, I'm going to take another drink of tea here. I'm going to run out of tea before the end of the show. You know that? Before we get started with our guest tonight, I want to remind you about the free newsletter here at Personal Defense, The Wire. And this keeps you up to date with everything that's going on here at Personal Defense Network. Now, this is a free newsletter. You sign up for it, get in your mailbox every week. It's jam-packed with information about new articles, new videos, new stuff going on here at Personal Defense Network. Now, hundreds of thousands, and I'm not kidding you, hundreds of thousands of people get the newsletter every week because it's got a lot of really great information in it. In fact, I use it to learn what's new here on Personal Defense Network. There's always something new happening. And the newsletter keeps me up to date with what's going on, new articles that have been posted. In fact, that's how I learned about the article that our special guest tonight wrote for Personal Defense Network. So sign up. If you're watching this on the show page here at Personal Defense Network, there's a little link down there where you can sign up. Just click on it, sign up. Don't do it now. Wait until after the show because there's a lot of good stuff coming up. But after the show, click on the link, sign up for the newsletter. And anytime you're on Personal Defense Network, there will be a little pop-up that pops up. And you can sign up that way. There are little boxes on all the web pages here at Personal Defense Network. You can sign up anytime. It's easy to get on, easy to get off, but you won't want to because the information is really, really great. So sign up for the newsletter and get free self-defense and personal security information every week in your email box. So I'm going to like I said, we've got a special guest tonight. My special guest tonight is Aaron Israel of, excuse me, here we go again, Fundamental Defense in the Fort Worth, Texas area. Now, Aaron is a veteran of the United States Army, and now this is kind of interesting. And if we've got time, maybe we'll kind of talk about this, but he's got experience in psychological operations and in field artillery. Now, one could say that field artillery is, in fact, a psychological weapon, but he's got really interesting experience there. And of course, he teaches defensive shooting and self-defense classes all over Texas, from what I understand, and especially in the Fort Worth area. And like I said, his company is Fundamental Defense. So welcome to the show, Aaron Israel.
Thanks for having me, Grant.
Hey, good to see you again. And we were talking before the show, and your weather down there is a lot nicer than our weather here. Can I like move down there and live in your house or something?
Yeah, we'd love to have you. Come on down.
Okay. Interestingly enough, I've not made it to Texas yet. And one of these days I will. So
got a lot of revolver guys down here. You'd fit right in.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I always like to hear that.
Yeah.
So you wrote an interesting article for Personal Defense Network not too long ago. And the article is about poker defense and its relation to self-defense, which I found really kind of interesting. Now, first of all, before we get too far into this, everybody needs to know I'm not a poker player. I played poker a couple of times. I'm very, very bad at it. And this is not me sandbagging anything. I'm really, really bad at it. So you may have to explain some poker terms as we go along, but so with the understanding that I'm not much of a poker player, tell me what the correlation between poker and self-defense is.
Good stuff. So I've been playing poker for probably the past 10, 15 years or so. I was real big into it when it was still legal to play it online back when I was in college. And I'll go to Vegas with my family every couple of years. And I like to sit down at the cash games at the casinos, and I play Texas Hold'em. And I don't play in the big tournaments, but at the cash games, I like to sit down there and just sit there and play with other people that are just there to be tourists. So I don't get too into the competitive side, but I've been playing it for a while. The reason I like Texas Hold'em, that specific game of poker, which is the most popular one that you can play in casinos now, is that it's got a chance element, but you don't have to be a big time gambler to play poker. So you're not going to see me at the roulettes or the crap tables just throwing dice and trying to win money off pure chance. With poker, you got that chance element because you're playing cards, but you can also sit down and it's a human interaction game. You're interacting with the people around the table. You're learning how they play their cards, what messages they're sending with what they're doing and how they're betting. And then you can actually learn how to do statistical calculations in your head while you're playing the game to figure out what your chances of winning the pot are. So you're going to play your cards based on your interactions with the people and based on what your statistical odds are of winning that you're calculating as you get dealt each card and what other people at the table do. So there's strategy to it. So there's the luck element, but you can also do things by being prepared and learning how to play the game from a statistical perspective and from reading people that gives you a better chance of winning. And so you're not just against the house on pure luck. It's actually a game of skill, much like personal defense. And the way it correlates is that in personal defense, there's the luck element. You read about people in the NRA magazine in the Armed Citizen column who have zero training, store their weapons poorly, sometimes haven't got their gun out and shot it ever. It just happens to be sitting there and it's just in the right place at the right time. And that bad guy kicks in their door and they're able to survive that worst case scenario with no training whatsoever. So that's that luck element there in playing personal defense. And on the flip side of that, you can be as well prepared as we tell you to be in personal defense and have taken all of our classes and read the articles and tune in to Training Talk. And still, if the bad guys got the drop on you and the circumstances don't work out in your favor, then that luck element can mean that you lose that gunfight that you may have thought you were prepared for. But just like in poker, you can do things by being involved in taking classes and practicing and going to the range and using your defensive tools and learning how to think with a defensive mindset. That's the same thing that I do when I try to learn how to read people at the poker table and play my cards based on statistics. So you can do the same sort of thing to mitigate that chance element, but it's always going to be present. So there's a lot of corollaries there in the things that you ought to be doing. Now, anybody can walk into a casino with, as long as they know what hand beats what hand and have that basic poker knowledge, even if they've just seen it in a movie, they can sit down at a table and they can get lucky and they can take out a guy who's been playing his whole life just because the cards land that way. That could happen. In the same way, you can go through your whole life carrying a gun, never take an hour of training, and then in the moment of truth, you can get lucky and walk away from that unscathed and live to tell about it. But if you're serious about poker and if you're serious about personal defense, then you're going to do things that increase your odds of winning that pot, of surviving that worst case scenario. And so I think there's a lot of correlation there.
You know, there's an old saying that luck counts, but you can't count on luck. Do you think that acknowledging and you're not the first person I've heard that acknowledges the role of luck in self-defense, but do you think that acknowledging the role of self-defense might be in a way self-defeating in that it might sabotage our efforts to train and equip properly? And the reason I say that is because when we look in the armed citizen, we look at all these things that happen, we see people get lucky all the time, and maybe most people get lucky all the time. A lot of people might see that and conclude that, well, they'll be lucky too.
Right.
So the question is, do you think it's self-defeating to even acknowledge that?
I don't think so, because it goes both ways. You could have the attitude of, I think I'm going to get lucky like those other people. But then, there are those people who, police officers all the time. A lot of them are as prepared as they can be, and they ought to have the drop on the bad guy. And sometimes they get killed with their own gun. So luck goes the other way too. So if you never acknowledge that chance element, then it could lead you to make really bad decisions. So we talk about evade, barricade, respond as it relates to self-protection inside the home, and how it's a good idea to barricade yourself in the house when you hear that bump in the night and not go searching that out with your flashlight and gun, because even if you find that bad guy, you could be shot by that person. There's no guarantee you're going to win that gunfight. And I think too many people in our community have this assumption that just because they have a gun, if they get into a confrontation, they're going to win it. And that totally ignores the chance element. And if you don't realize that there's no guarantees in life or in poker, then you're going to be a lot more aggressive and a lot more reckless than you need to be. And that's, I think, the message that I'm trying to get across there is be more conservative and don't play those cards unless you've got a good reasonable belief that you've got a chance of winning. And a lot of times, I mean, I fold 90% of the hands that I get in poker because they're not worth playing and there's not a good chance I'm going to win. The odds aren't there. And too many people are willing to play too many hands in the world of self-defense. And a lot of times, like the lady at the Waffle House you talked about in the ranch, she ought to have not done anything there. And there's all kinds of examples like that we hear about on in the news all the time, where people just get overconfident and do dumb things. So,
there's an old movie with an old country singer by the name of Kenny Rogers, called "You Have to Know When to Fold 'Em."
yep.
And self-defense is kind of like that, right? You have to know, you have to understand what's going on around you, and you have to understand when it's time to do whatever you need to do to survive the incident, whether that's de-escalation or evasion or whatever it is. Um, so talk a little bit about knowing when to fold when we're talking about self-defense. What are some of the circumstances under which you might decide to fold rather than to play?
Well, do I have a compelling reason to draw my gun and get involved in this situation? And I think that comes up a lot when we talk about defense of a third person, when you talk about getting involved on behalf of someone else. And there's a lot of situations where, if you're real gung-ho and overconfident. I mean, there was one in Fort Worth not too long ago where a guy came in and shot his girlfriend in a Walgreens, and similar situation to the Waffle House. Guy runs out to his car, retrieves his defensive firearm that he wasn't carrying, goes and confronts this guy as he's trying to leave the parking lot, and ends up getting killed by the guy in front of his wife and kids who were sitting in the truck. So that's a situation where the situation was already handled. The guy he'd already shot somebody, so he's capable of using that deadly force, and he's trying to leave. And this guy takes almost a vigilante type posture and tries to stop the guy from leaving when he should have just folded out, because there was not a compelling reason for him to get involved. If there would have been, then he would have had his gun in the store, and maybe he could have affected it there, or maybe rendering aid to the person that got shot. But there's situations like that all the time where the odds are not in your favor to get involved, and you ought to just not do that thing. And back to the home defense thing, I mean, not going outside when you hear that bump in the night, staying in your house, calling the police, letting them come and clear the area, things like that. When you clearly know that the odds are not in your favor, if you know what to look for, then don't get involved. And not getting involved is usually the right answer when you think about personal defense. You got to have a real compelling reason to draw your gun.
You talk about going all in the article, and which is kind of the opposite of knowing when to fold. And you talk about going all in, and what reminded me of that today is I was reading a comment on an article. It was actually on Facebook, and I violated my own rule about never reading the comments. But I did in this case, and it was a stupid thing to do. But this one guy is talking about how, I open carry all the time, and I'm alert 24/7, and I'm willing to do everything that's necessary to protect myself. And I think he said he had joined a militia or something crazy like that. Is that going all in?
Yeah, so going all in poker is not a bad bet all the time. It just depends on when you do it. So in the article, I talk about going all in before the flop. So for poker terminology there, since I know I'm not talking to a poker player, the flop in Texas Hold'em is the first 3 community cards that you see that are dealt that everybody gets to see. You got 2 cards in your hand that you get dealt initially. Everybody makes a round of betting, and then after everybody's bet and everything's good, then they lay down the first 3 cards, and that's called the flop. So if you go all in before the flop, that means you push all your chips in and all your money's out there, and you're making the biggest bet you possibly can before you even see the first 3 community cards. What you're telling everybody at the table is, I think I've got the winning hand. And the reason you would make a play like going all in that early in the poker game is really not because you want anybody to call you and match your all in bet. It's because you're trying to scare the people off the pot before those cards are ever dealt. So what you're doing is you're trying to buy the antes, basically, and it's seldom that you're going to get called on that. But if you do that too frequently and you do it recklessly and you don't time it right, eventually somebody who's a veteran player is going to call your all-in bet, and then it's going to be, hey, you're going to have to flip your cards over and you may win, you may not. And a lot of times you end up getting taken out for being overly aggressive. So it's okay to make an all-in bet when the odds are likely to be in your favor. When you've got good hands, you've seen the flop, you've seen what the other players are doing, and you think, okay, I can make a play to get all my chips out there and hopefully win a big pot. But when you're open carrying, you're all in before the flop. You don't know what every bad guy's mentality is. You don't know for sure that you're going to deter them, like a lot of open carry advocates like to talk about. Could you deter them? Absolutely. Could everybody be scared off the pot when you make an all-in bet before the flop? Absolutely. But all it takes is that one aggressive guy who's not buying it, and you get taken out. And so we see situations where open carriers have had their guns taken away. Police have to open carry. They're all in by regulation, and they get their guns taken from them. So if it can happen to them, it can happen to you. And why would you go all in before you even know what your opponent's capable of, before you've seen the situation develop? It's even worse kind of than going all in with open carrying, because not only are you going all in, you're showing them your cards. They know what you're capable of doing. So it's just not a good play. It's a bad timing thing in poker to do that early all the time. And in open carrying, you're going all in before the flop. So
not knowing who actually, and it's kind of worse because not only do you not know what the cards are, you don't even know who the players are yet.
Exactly. You haven't sat across the table from them. You don't know who's out there or what they're capable of. And there's some violent dudes out there who aren't afraid to get shot at or anything like that. So that's why the police get fight with.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that our defensive firearms that we carry have value to the bad guys. I mean, there's an intrinsic value to them, of course, because they can always sell them on the open market. But there's also the utilitarian value to them because they can use them to perform other crimes with. So
Sure.
they have dual value to the bad guy, and it seems to me that allowing the bad guy to know that you've got this thing that he really wants before you even know he's there is probably a bad idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's another way I've heard it described is kind of like showing your playbook to the other team. You're kind of, in football, you try to keep that secret so they don't know what you're going to run next, but you're telling them exactly what you're capable of. And so, you're kind of going from 0 to 60 if that fight escalates before having a chance to go through potentially other more prudent steps aside from drawing that gun and getting that fight over it.
So, what do you mean when you say empty posturing, and how do you think that affects the criminal's decision to mount an attack?
Okay, well, what I'm referring to there and the corollary to poker to start out with. So when you're sitting at the table, poker's gotten real popular over the past decade or so, and the World Series of Poker is big on ESPN. And there, you see how the guys dress on those shows. They got the flat brim ball cap and the sunglasses on when it's not dark outside and they're indoors, and flashy jewelry and all that sort of thing. When you see a guy like that sit down at a cash game in Vegas, playing with a bunch of tourists, that's empty posturing that I'm talking about. That's the old saying in the movie Rounders. It's real popular poker players. If you don't spot the sucker in the first 5 minutes, it's you. Well, that's usually the guy. When I see that guy sit down, I know this guy's going to call every bet. He's going to play real aggressive. I'm probably going to be able to take his stack if I just, bide my time and wait for him to do something dumb. That's those guys that open carry their guns with, no retention on their holsters. And then, even guys who concealed carry. If you're rolling out in the 511 catalog from top to bottom with combat boots on and an American flag patch hat, everybody knows you're carrying a gun. So that's that. A lot of time empty posturing is I want to look the part, but then you find out that a lot of those guys spend all this money on t-shirts and looking really cool, but not actually training, or otherwise if they had the training, they would know that they're giving up the element of surprise. And I don't know any self-defense instructor worth their salt who's going to tell you to dress or act like that, because bad guys, if they're not intimidated, and I keep going back to the police, they're not intimidated by the uniform. They're not going to be intimidated by how you're dressing and carrying yourself just in and of itself. You got to be prepared for the fact that you might get into a fight with a guy who just doesn't care about that. And a lot of people have that empty posturing out there, but nothing to back it up because they don't train. They don't read books about self-defense. They don't think about how to mitigate risk generally and be well-rounded. And so they're just setting themselves up for failure in the same way that guy with the flat brim ball cap and the sunglasses is setting himself up for me to take him all in and take his chips. So,
Back these days, it's the 511 catalog. Back Well, when I got started in this, the big giveaway for somebody who's carrying a gun was the photographer's vest, right?
Yeah.
They all
Yep.
wanted to wear a photographer's vest. Now, I came out of the photographic industry and I was a commercial photographer for a while. And I ran a chain of camera stores. And in the chain of camera stores I ran, we certainly carried the photographer's vest, but I never, ever had a pro customer that bought a photographer's
Right.
vest. The
Right.
only guys that were buying them were the cops who were coming in because they wanted something to wear off duty.
Yep.
It was okay. Everybody knows. Um, so we talk about strategy in poker, and I guess all of this sort of comes down to strategy. But um, let's make a direct link between strategy in poker and strategy in self defense.
Well, it's very similar in poker. Like I said at the beginning, you're doing statistical calculations there. If I get dealt a certain set of cards and I'm trying for a certain hand, then I know how many cards are left in the deck that are going to make my hand. And I know how much money's in the pot, and I can do a statistical calculation to figure out what my chances of winning that pot are and make my bets accordingly. And I can also look at what other people around the table are doing and how they're betting, and I can make a calculation on the emotions and the play of the game there on whether it's a good idea for me to take this person in and try to go the distance and see all the cards and see if I can win. In personal defense, you're doing the same risk mitigation, even though you're not doing math. When you decide where you're going to go to eat and what part of town you're going to do business in, where you're going to live, when you decide to buy a house, is it a nice neighborhood? Is there crime in this area? You're making risk calculations about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so regardless of whether you have a firearm or other defensive tools, if you're not making good risk calculations about how you live your life, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So you can watch all the poker TV shows you want, and if you don't sit down and calculate risk, you're going to in the long run get beat. And in self-defense, it's the same thing. If you go to bad parts of town, it doesn't matter if you've got a gun or not, you're still making a bad decision. So it's the same sort of thing. You got to calculate risk with everything you do, everywhere you go, how you carry yourself, how you dress, how you carry your gun. All of those things are risk calculations, the same as I'm making in poker.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, and I've told this to people for a long time, that the bad guy is, whether he knows it or not, is making the same kind of risk benefit calculation. He's looking at, if he's a resource predator, what can I get out of this guy, or what can I get out of this house, or what can I get out of this car, versus what is the risk of me being caught or injured by the homeowner or the concealed carrier. He's doing the same thing.
Yep.
And he may not know it, and in a lot of cases they could probably never articulate that, but understanding that he's doing the same thing, and if I'm hearing you correctly, you need to do that,
Yep.
and perhaps maybe a little more consciously. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Absolutely, yeah. Just like you said, the bad guy is making those risk assessments even subconsciously, and that relates back to poker too. Is the guy across the table is looking at every bet that I make and every hand that I play, and he's trying to figure out what my game is, when I'm likely to go in, when I'm likely to go out. And knowing that the bad guy is doing the same thing, you want to put more thought into it and be more deliberate about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and the decisions that you're making, and that sets you up. The goal is never to have to use your defensive firearms. And I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm carrying a defensive firearm, so that gives me a license to make a dumber decision. I've heard people say, like, I'm carrying a bigger gun today because I'm going to this bad place, or, this Walmart where I know bad things happen. I'm like, well, why are you doing that? So you ought to be making those deliberate risk calculations in the way that you live your life. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a bad time.
I've told people for a long time that if you're doing things, because you'll hear a lot of people, not just people who are relatively new to self-defense or relatively new to concealed carry, but you hear even sometimes instructors say this,
Oh,
that
yeah.
They'll say something like, well, I didn't wear my gun. Excuse me. I didn't wear my gun. I found myself being a lot more cautious. And I tell people, listen, if you sense any change in your behavior, whether you're wearing the gun or whether you're not, you're doing it wrong.
Yep.
Because that's not the point.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually both, I think, wrote pretty close to the same blog post at the same time on our one on PDN and then on your site that talked about that, the idea of I can't go to a place if I'm not carrying my gun, or I don't have those warm and fuzzies, and I start to pay more attention when I'm not carrying my gun, just like you said. And people have that talisman effect, that they think that just because I'm carrying the gun, that itself somehow decreases the likelihood of me being attacked. Well, no, it just gives you a better tool to respond to an attack. But if you're making the calculation that this isn't a good place for me to go, then I shouldn't go there with a gun. I shouldn't go there without a gun. And if I have to, for whatever reason, legally or practically or otherwise, not carry my gun in there, how I mitigate risk and how I make that assessment shouldn't change. Otherwise, I'm doing it wrong. So
Right. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about kind of there's kind of a link to another article that you wrote for PDN a while back, and is one that you wrote after going to the NRA annual meetings and convention, and you wrote one called "All Hat No Cattle," which I think kind of fits in here. And so for the non-country people out, I'm a child of the West. I grew up ranching and farming, so this is no news to me. But for those of us who maybe in the listening audience who are more urbanite than we are, explain to them what all hat no cattle means and how that applies to self-defense and what you observed.
So all hat, no cattle means that you dress up like a cowboy. You got the big cowboy hat, you got your cowboy boots and your Western clothes, but you wouldn't know the first thing about what kind of a cow that is. You wouldn't know the first thing about how to take care of that cow. You wouldn't know the first thing about riding a horse, roping, any of the things that cowboys do, but you're trying to portray yourself as a cowboy. And the way that relates to what I saw at NRA, and it's not just NRA, it's gun shows, it's all the places that you go where the gun culture is. You see the people walking around with the "I believe in self-defense" uniform. They got either a T-shirt that says some quippy thing about, I carry a 45, I was gonna make a 46, whatever, or Second Amendment, printed out or tattooed on them, whatever the case may be. And so they're putting off this air of I care about personal defense. But then when they come by my booth, they're like, you know what? I really just can't afford to go to a training class, but let me tell you about this new rifle that I just bought last week, that cost me, $2,000 or whatever it is, but I can't afford the $300 or $400 to come to a one-day class because that just puts me out. And so that's being all hat, no cattle. That's not spending the time on the range, not reading books about personal defense, not doing things to actually prepare yourself for the possibility of a worst case scenario, but walking around acting like you're ready for the fight. And that's what you see a lot in the gun culture that I think is unfortunate.
We here in the Pacific Northwest, the rough equivalent to that are hipsters who like to dress like loggers, but really don't know which end of a chainsaw is up.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, because it's kind of the same thing about dressing in the self-defense uniform, right? Except in this particular case, there's nothing to back it up.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of people, and that goes back to that empty posturing. You're putting off this air of I'm ready for a fight, but are you? I mean, what have you done to really physically prepare yourself for the possibility of a fight? And what if it's not a fight with your gun? What if you have to go to the ground? What if you're in really bad shape and you couldn't last the 30 seconds in the fight? What if you haven't thought about that? What if you have this whole home defense plan and a whole bunch of rifles and things like that, but you haven't upgraded the screws in your back plates on your deadbolt? All kinds of stuff like that. So you can sit there in empty posture and look like the quote unquote gun guy, but if you're not actually taking physical steps to mitigate those risks and to actually prepare yourself for a worst case scenario, then you're all hat, no cattle. So,
there was this may have been the NRA show that you were at, where I had popped in. I was doing some work for one of the manufacturers, and I took some time, popped in to listen to our executive director Rob Pincus's talk, and I popped in just in time for him to say something to the effect of, "Well, maybe you should sell one of your guns and take a course if you haven't." And it was like, oh my God, it's like he had spit all over the Virgin Mary or something. This was not something anybody wanted to hear, but I think a lot of times it's something that people really do need to hear, because you can have a safe full of guns, but if you don't understand how to use them, like this again, we come back to this lady at the Waffle House. She's got a gun. Certainly, she's got ammunition. But if you don't understand how to use it, the consequences can be much worse than what she went through. Certainly.
Absolutely. I mean, she could have walked out there and been shot by those guys that she was firing a warning shot at. People take for granted that, oh, I fired well, what if they would have shot back? Why did you go out there? You put yourself in unneeded danger. And that's, anybody who's trained or taken a class from a reputable instructor or even read the things that are available on PDN would know that that's a bad idea. And so there's just too much of that out there, but we do what we can.
So speaking of spending money, let's say somebody came to you and said, I want you to help me spend my money to become safer, to become more secure, to lead a more self-reliant lifestyle, a more protective lifestyle. And they said, here, they hand you their checkbook. They say, here, help me spend money. What are you going to tell them to do and why?
Well, I'm not going to go straight to the gun. That's what a lot of people expect you to do is you got to get a gun today. Well, no. First off, what are you doing to make yourself more self-reliant just inside your house? What are you doing to make it harder for the bad guy to get where you are? I talked about upgrading your physical security on your house. Do you have a floodlight installed? Have you put 3-inch screws into your deadbolt so that it's not as easy to kick your door in? It's going to take 4 kicks instead of 1. Have you thought about that? What about this glass screen door? Are you going to replace that and put a solid wood door on your back door so it's not easy to get into your house? Are you going to do these simple, inexpensive things first? And then we can start talking about, okay, now let's think about what if somebody did come into your home? Then we start talking about defensive tools, where to stage them, things like that. And you can make those purchases relatively inexpensively. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about getting to a training class. You don't need to have 30 guns. It'd be better to have one training class than 29 of those. So I'm going to tell them, hey, you've got your physical security taken care of. You're thinking about what to do inside your house. And now maybe you consider getting concealed handgun permit. If you have to do a class in your state, that's obviously a first good step, is to get legal with the state. That's usually inexpensive. Knock that out. And then from there, I'm going to get to a training class with a reputable instructor. So I think Rob even wrote an article about this on PDN that I pretty much fall in line with, that you're looking at, the kind of the starter pack for armed self-defense. You're looking at probably $1,500 or something like that. And it's going to follow along those same lines of take care of the basics first. Don't go out and buy a $2,000 rifle, get an affordable defensive handgun, and then get out there and take a training class and then start practicing and start budgeting your time and your money to get out to the range and practice as often as possible. So.
Okay. So you live in Texas. Texas is known as a gun-friendly state, I think. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. Do you think being a gun-friendly state means that it's also a self-defense savvy state?
In my experience, it depends on the Texan. In general, I think that there's a lot of bravado that comes with being a Texan. Everything's bigger in Texas. That swagger and carrying yourself, and so there's a lot of all hat no cattle, like we talked about. There's a lot of people that have that swagger and think that just because they were born a Texan and grew up around guns and have had a gun in their room since they were 5 years old or whatever, that somehow means that they don't need any training, that it was passed on to them in their bloodstream, that I'm good to go because I'm a Texan. And, you see, there's a big open carry movement in Texas where a lot of guys want to walk around, with sometimes really obnoxious, impractical guns on their hips, usually in, cheap holsters with no retention. That's beside the point. But, there's a lot of posturing. So I think that the culture in general, and it's definitely a generalization and a stereotype, but there's a lot of that empty posturing. And so it just depends on the individual Texan. There are a lot of communities, gun clubs and other places that I've been involved in where I still teach at, where there is a good core group of people that really care about personal defense. But the average gun owner in Texas has a lot of that bravado and thinks that, hey, have that John Wayne type mentality. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're self-defense savvy just because you live in a gun-friendly state. And Texas, I mean, isn't as gun friendly as your Arizona's. We're trying to get to constitutional carry and some of the stuff on the legal side, and we'll get there eventually. But there's a lot of mythology about Texas that doesn't necessarily pan out when you meet the gun owners that you do in the state. So
I think that's probably true for everywhere,
right,
because you have the people who believe that because they're male, they already know everything they need to know about self defense, or because their dad was in the military, they know everything. It was like came down through osmosis or something.
right,
Um,
yeah.
that they know everything they need to know. So very cool. It's been an interesting discussion, and I've got a question for you. Can you hang around for a few minutes and answer some viewer email with me?
Sure thing.
Okay, hang on for a minute, because what I need to do before we do that is I need to talk to everybody about the premium membership here at Personal Defense Network. And premium membership. Now, if you're new to the show, or if you're new to Personal Defense Network, you may not be aware that we have the public side of Personal Defense Network, where you get all these great free articles and videos, but there's also a membership side that you don't see unless you are a member. And on the membership side of Personal Defense Network, we have a ton of incredibly great information, full length, like DVD length videos, online courses, all that kind of thing that you can access when you're a premium member. And there's just, I've been a premium member since we set this up way back when, and I haven't seen everything on the premium side of Personal Defense Network. There's just a ton of really great information. In fact, we've got something really cool where we do video collections. So, for instance, you want to learn about concealed carry. Well, we've got a video collection for that, and you just click on one link, and here are all the great videos that we have about concealed carry and all the stuff you need to know. And there's all kinds of things like that on the premium membership side of Personal Defense Network. Now, it's normally $34.95 a year, and it's worth every penny. And I don't think you'll find very many premium members who won't tell you that it is, because it really is. But I've got a deal for you. If you sign up for premium membership, when you go to checkout, the part where you're putting in your credit card number and all that kind of thing, there's a little box there that says discount code, or might say coupon code. If you put in the code GRANT10, that's GRANT, the number 1, the number 0, all one word, GRANT10, put that in there, you'll get your first year of premium membership here at Personal Defense Network for only $10. That is a screaming whale of a deal. And it'll give you a chance to get it. And this is not like some limited kind of trial sort of premium membership. It is full premium membership. And you can get in there, look at all the great videos, watch all the wonderful stuff that we've got, learn a lot more about personal defense and self-security and all that kind of thing for your first year for only $10. And again, the code is GRANT10, GRANT, the number 1, the number 0, all one word, and just put that in, and you get your first year of premium membership here at Personal Defense Network for only $10, which is just a screaming whale of a deal. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. Because like I said, even with all the great free information we've got here at Personal Defense Network, and we've got a lot of it, and great contributors like Aaron, but on the premium membership side, you're going to find even more. So sign up, try it out for $10 for your first year. Again, GRANT10, GRANT, the number 1, the number 0, all one word, and your first membership. Your first year of membership, rather, at Personal Defense Network is only $10 with that code. So take advantage of it. Make that a New Year's resolution. Put it on your New Year's resolution list to take advantage of premium membership at Personal Defense Network for only $10. So I asked Aaron to stick around for a little bit, because we've got some fewer emails, and we'll see how many we get to here. This first one came in a while back, and let's see if I can find it here. Here we go. And he's asking about, and he uses a specific brand name, but we're talking about pistol-mounted red dot sights. Now, these are the tiny little red dot sights that mount onto the slide of a semi-automatic pistol. One of the big brand names is RMR. One of the big model names is RMR, and a lot of people are using that now generically, kind of like we use Kleenex generically. But RMRs, or pistol mounted red dot sights, and RMR is a lot easier to say. Anyway, he's asking what I think about pistol mounted red dot sights, RMRs, for personal defense, and whether I think that that it is worth getting the work done to my gun to mount an RMR on it. Is it the future of defensive handgunning? Okay, interesting question. I'll start off. I'll tell you where I am with these. No, I'm not a big huge fan of these things, but I am hopeful. And let me talk a little bit about that. The RMRs, the red dot sights, basically have their little device with a little windshield in them, and projected on the windshield is a little red dot. And when you're shooting the gun, what you do is, once you've got the sight adjusted and all that kind of thing, you put the red dot on whatever you want to hit. You can maintain your focus on the threat, maintain your focus on the target, and the red dot appears to be projected at the same distance as the target. And so you just put the red dot on the target, press the trigger, and in theory, the bullet goes wherever the red dot was. And I'll start off with the benefits. They make shooting at long distances or to very great degrees of precision somewhat easier than using the sights on the gun, particularly perhaps if your eyesight is not so good anymore. Now, the problem I have with them isn't the fact that I don't like technology. I love technology. I'm a technology junkie. But whenever I look at new technology, I ask, what problem does it solve that we couldn't solve before? What are the new downsides that this brings to the table? Because there's always a downside with anything. And are the downsides worth the potential gain that we get from it? And I'm not talking in terms of money. I'm talking in terms of function and in terms of what it gives us. And as far as I'm concerned, the red dot sights are not quite there yet. First of all, they're really only useful when we're talking about shooting to extreme levels of precision or shooting at implausible distances. They really do make a difference there. They can really help. When we're talking about the plausible kinds of distances and the plausible kinds of situations where we typically use a defensive handgun, they're considerably less positive in their benefit. In fact, in a lot of cases, I would say they're probably a net loss, because they tend to be a little slower as people start looking for that dot. We've also seen some issues with durability. They're getting better, and I expect them to continue to get better as time goes on, but there's still problems with durability. They are electronic devices, and electronic devices can fail. I'm not so much worried about physical failure, but the failure of the electronics, which does happen from time to time. Of course, the rejoinder to that is, well, you still got the iron sights on the gun. The problem with that is, by the time you figure out whether you're just not seeing the dot because you haven't gotten it aligned just right yet, or the sight is truly broken and you don't have a dot, that's a sort of this long space of time that you have to make that decision. And all of a sudden, any time benefit that the red dot sight brought you is completely eaten up by that decision making. Am I just not seeing the dot, or is there not a dot there and I need to do something else? And I've certainly seen that happen. One of the other issues, and I've seen this here in the wet, rainy Pacific Northwest, get a few drops of water on the screen of the red dot sight, and all of a sudden it doesn't work so well, because you've got sort of dots all over the place, as each little drop of water acts like a prism to magnify a false dot. And even at very, very close distances, the people who are used to using them all of a sudden start missing targets, and I've seen it happen more than once. One of the big issues I have with them is that they're large, and they increase the size of the gun. And we're always talking about reducing the size of the gun, making it easier to carry, and now we're going to put something on it that dramatically increases the size of the gun. And finally, the thing that sort of annoys me about them, and it takes a little time to get used to, is the fact that the dot sits quite a ways above the slide. And it's sort of like looking in one direction and pointing the gun in another direction as you sort of lower the gun down to the level, and you can see the dot. And it does take some getting used to. All of a sudden that bring the gun up into a parallel with your line of sight, that combination of visually augmented kinesthetic alignment doesn't work so well, and it actually becomes a lot slower as a result. So no, I'm not a big fan of them. I hope in the future that a lot of these issues will be resolved, that we'll maybe get some really cool sight that will actually be a benefit over a very, very wide range of circumstances. I don't think they're there yet. So that's my personal opinion. Aaron, what do you think about red dot sights on defensive pistols?
Well, I kind of echo all your sentiments. The only thing that you didn't really touch on that I've seen in classes a lot is that when you are making a precise shot, a precise sighted fire shot using a red dot, I see a lot more people hesitate because you can see the physical movement of your gun that is apparent in a red dot sight, but is not apparent with iron sight. So while you may not hesitate when you see that sight picture and you touch and press the trigger when you got to take that precise shot with regular sights, when you see that dot bouncing around, it makes you hesitate and sometimes end up jerking a shot low or whatever the case may be. And you touched on the kinesthetic alignment piece. People have a tendency to get more of an upright posture when they're shooting with the dots instead of in a fully engaged posture like we want them for defensive shooting. And most of the guys that I see show up with the red dots on their guns are usually guys that I still shoot matches. You know, I'm one of the few defensive guys that still runs in that world too. And a lot of the guys that I meet at matches who come to my class will show up with a competition type gun, at least in their bag, and they might try to shoot it during the class, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of brand new shooters show up with those things. So I think it's kind of right now, the stage that it's in, still evolving. It's kind of a gun guy thing. And so, I mean, it's guys who want the sexy gear showing up with them, but I don't think that for the average defensive shooting guy that it makes sense to turn your $600 Glock into a $1,500 Glock, because I don't think the benefit is there for the amount of expense. So
yeah, I agree with you. And like I said, I hope that, someday as we continue to, and I don't want to sort of put cold water on innovation, because I'd like to see innovation in anything that will help us stay safer and do a better job. But right now, I'm saying it's cool kid stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, hey, great show, Aaron. Great. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sticking around and answering viewer email. And we're just about out of time. Tell us where people can get a hold of you, when you're teaching, where you're teaching, all that kind of stuff.
My website's fundamentaldefense.com, and I've got my spring schedule posted. I teach in the Fort Worth area, but look for classes out in West Texas and the Midland area, and maybe possibly some in Oklahoma later this year we're working on. So I'm kind of teaching pretty much anywhere in my little 200-mile radius at DFW here. So that's where you can find me. I'm on Facebook. If you search Fundamental Defense, you'll see my page. I'm on Instagram at Fun Defense, and all the rest of the social media. If you just search Fundamental Defense, you'll find me. I'm also a regular contributor to the Armed Lutheran podcast. So if you're into listening to Pro Gun podcast, you can check me out on there. I do a weekly self-defense tip, kind of in the same vein of what we talked about tonight, trying to put out that good information. So check me out over there, and love to see you on the range.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge with us. And that's gonna just about wrap it up for us. A couple of things before we go. Don't forget our next show, which is 2 weeks from tonight, and that makes it the 19th, the second Thursday of this month, and that's going to be right in the middle of SHOT Show, actually. So that'll be an interesting show. Maybe we'll have some new stuff to talk about. I don't know. We'll find out. There's always some interesting self-defense gear and items introduced at SHOT Show. Maybe we'll hear about some of those. And of course, the usual great information about self-defense and personal preparedness and all that other stuff that we always talk about. So don't miss that. January 19th, Thursday, the second Thursday of this month, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. And of course, feel free to email me, Grant at grantcunningham.com. Love to get the emails, love to get the questions that I can answer hopefully here on the show. So do send those cards and letters. Very nice to always really nice to hear from you guys. And don't forget the Personal Defense Network free weekly newsletter. Sign up anytime. Use the link. Now you can use the link on the page. Okay. Click on that, sign up for the free newsletter. And of course, take advantage of the $10 for your first year premium membership here at Personal Defense Network. And that code again, Grant10, GRANT, the number 1, the number 0, and all one word, and put that in at checkout. You'll get your first year for $10. So great deal. And we will see you on our next show. And until that time, stay safe. See you soon.